Frankenstein's Aunt by Rune Pettersson. Next stop, Frankenstein. The train whistle shrilled through the night like a scream of terror. The old lady in the smoking compartment leaned forward to look out of the window. She still couldn't see anything, for the window was steamed up and streaked with rain. The night outside was black as soot. Smoke from the engine now and again swirled down round the carriage, making her feel she was being driven through the clouds. Lightning flashed across the sky, for a moment revealing bare, wet mountain peaks and thick, black pine forests. Then it was dark again, not a single light from a human dwelling to be seen. The train rattled on through the night, the claps of the thunder drowned by the thumpity thump of the wheels on the rails. The old lady leaned back and lit a cigar. She was beginning to get thoroughly fed up with this journey. If only her secretary had come with her, as had been decided from the start. But he was in bed at home with yet another cold. He ought to see a specialist about all those colds, she thought irritably. And then the railway company had the nerve to call this first class, which she thought was nothing but a mockery to an old person. The seats were dreadfully saggy, and the lighting was worse than pale, one single light bulb in a bell-shaped pink shade spreading a dim, trembling light over the compartment. It was almost impossible to even think of reading. Several times she had tried to make some kind of sense out of the notes her nephew had left behind, but it was even more difficult in this light. The boy was certainly good at making a mess of things anyhow. That much she had managed to fathom. Of course, Henry had always been pretty hopeless as a child, but that as an adult, he should have had the idea of putting together a monster from pieces of dead people. What an idea! Distasteful, too. However, scientists and soldiers were all the same, and she had both kinds in her family. They never really grew up. To scientists and soldiers, life was just one long holiday among test tubes and tin soldiers. Or that was what she thought. She picked up the yellowing sheaf of papers from her lap and tried again. She found a place that defied even the dim light and read with rising excitement. One lonely, stormy night with the rain drumming against the window panes. My work was completed. He was lying there, the first human ever to be created by human hand. I shiver as I write when I consider the extent of my deed. In charnel houses and churchyards, by the light of flickering candles in musty tombs, I had gathered the material for this creation in the most ungodly way. I had done my best to give him friendly and pleasant features. I had stitched and patched day and night, but now there he was, still bandaged from head to foot, not unlike a mummy. And then I was filled with horror at the thought that I might have failed. Trembling with anxiety, I got my instruments ready to bring a spark of life to my creation. At that moment the train again whistled shrilly, and the old lady was glad to know the monster had been lying harmless for a decade under tons of stone up there in the ruined laboratory. She drew deeply on her cigar and went on reading. How can I describe my feelings as the bandages fell away and he finally opened his eyes? Beautiful? Had I thought I'd made him beautiful? His yellow skin scarcely stretched over his bones and sinews, as if I had tried to sew a far too large body into a patchwork of too small clothes. And that head I'd worked so hard on, I had tried to give him a high intellectual forehead. The forehead was high enough, all right, but far too high. And his hair was hanging down in black straggles from his much too flat skull. But he was breathing. He was alive, and he was looking at me with his watery eyes and puckered skin on his face, the puckered skin on his face twitching, the thin black lips opening. Next stop, Frankenstein. The guard had thrust his drooping yellow mustache in through the compartment door, coughing at the cigar smoke, billowing out to meet him, and peering suspiciously from under the peak of his cap. Oh, this eternal malevolence that affected the whole family. The scoundrel, thought the old lady about her nephew, who was to blame for everything. Well, about time, too, the old lady said, majestically rising to her full height, cigar ash tumbling from her black traveling costume as she crushed the butt beneath the heel of her boot. The guard noticed that his own shoes were at least 5 sizes smaller, and he came just about up to her shoulder as they stood there. Can I get a porter at the station, do you think, my man? I should think so, missus. Or I shouldn't think so, missus. Not at this hour of night. The old lady thought she caught a glimpse of a malicious smile beneath the old man's yellow mustache. "Then I'll just have to manage," she said, letting her suitcase fall with a thump at his feet. "Unless the monster comes to meet me," she added with a wry little smile. The compartment door slammed shut, and the guard vanished. The whistle shrilled again, and the train slowed down. The old lady pressed her nose against the window, but the darkness was just as close. She started hauling her luggage out into the corridor. The train stopped with a jerk, the steam hissing. One single passenger alighted from the first-class carriage, a smoking compartment, and climbed down the steps into the pouring rain. Lightning lit up the station, a modest gray wooden building with rainwater gushing out of the drain pipes. Lightning also lit up the notice above the waiting room, showing the name that a few decades ago had spread terror and sudden death far and wide. Frankenstein. The name made a rather feeble impression now, the old lady thought, but perhaps that was just because the notice could have done with a lick of paint. As soon as the guard had seen her name on the ticket, he had started behaving differently toward her, and she regretted letting the travel agency write out her itinerary. She should have bought one of those ordinary little anonymous bits of cardboard instead. Of course, they didn't tell other people who she was. The guard had not been exactly unfriendly, but he had been very much on his guard, like a lion tamer who dared not turn his back on the lion. Before her journey, she had often wondered whether she would be met with the same great crowd of umbrellas or the same excited sea of torchlight that had often greeted her nephew, but when she stepped off the train, she saw that she needn't have worried. Not a single umbrella, nor a single torch, nor a single voice yelling at her to go back home. The only things to meet her were a flash of lightning, a soaking wet platform, a clap of thunder, and rain-filled darkness. The train had already moved off again, the engine coughing steam and spitting sparks. The carriage was jerking. The guard was just mounting the steps to his door, and he gave the old lady one long last look before he slid past her into the rain. She felt like sticking her tongue out at him, but controlled herself at the last moment. The family reputation was bad enough already because of that wretched Henry. She had no intention of concealing her connection with him, however. She had in fact come here to try to retrieve for the old family name some of its previous respect. She picked up her cases and walked over to the ticket office, where she had seen a faint light, so the village wasn't quite dead. A short distance away, hidden in the darkest spot, someone was watching her. And that's the end of the first chapter.